video is on how to solve an equation using quadratic methods. So, previously in this class, we talked about how to solve equations that have exponents that are higher than 1. If it's a 2, that's what we talked about previously in this chapter, what to do. But when it's not a 2, we can still use similar methods as to quadratic equations. So first of all, let's go ahead and try to use factoring. So let's go ahead and try to factor this. So to factor, it has to equal 0, so we're going to go ahead and add 1 to both sides. So we'd have 4y to the 4th minus 5y squared plus 1 equals 0. So then, to factor, we have to see if there's a GCF. There is not. So since it's a trinomial, we would multiply 4 times 1, which is 4. And we have to think about what multiplies to 4, and it has to add to negative 5. So we don't have a lot of choices. Here are our factors of 4. And it has to add to negative 5, so I know the bigger number is negative. But since it has to multiply to a positive, we know that both of them have to be negative. And we see that negative 1 and negative 4 would work. So the method that I showed to factor is we would take whatever this is and put it here and put it here. First of all, 4 times 4 is not 4. So we have an issue. We'll deal with that later. But y times y is y squared. We want it to be y to the 4th. So that's why we're going to put a y squared and a y squared there. Then we're going to go ahead and plug in our negative 1 and our negative 4. And then we're going to see if we can, and then see if anything here can be simplified. So nothing goes into both of these. And then here, 4 can go into both of these. So we would divide these by 4. And now, before we continue here, we have to make sure if this multiplies to give us our original problem. So if I do a quick check, 4 times 1 is 4. And negative 1 times negative 1 is positive 1. If I multiply this whole thing, I can make sure the middle part is right too. So then before I set these equal to 0, let's see if this could be factored further. So there's a square and there's a minus. And since 2y times 2y would get me 4y squared and 1 times 1 would get me this, I could factor this further as 2y plus 1 and 2y minus 1. And then same thing here, y times y is y squared and 1 times 1 is 1. So this is a difference of 2 squares, so we'd have y plus 1 and y minus 1. And now everything is completely factored. And now that everything's completely factored, we could set each of these equal to 0. Notice the highest exponent's 4, and we have 4 equations that we're going to solve here. So 2y plus 1 equals 0, 2y minus 1 equals 0, y plus 1 equals 0, and y minus 1 equals 0. So go ahead and solve all of these. So we get 1 as a solution, negative 1 as a solution. We would get 1/2 as a solution. And we'd get negative 1/2 as a solution. So again, the highest exponent's 4, and remember that means we can have up to 4 solutions, and we got 4 real solutions. Now remember, in terms to graphing, that means it crosses the, if these were x's, that is, it would hit the x-axis 4 times. That's what that would mean, again, if these were x's instead. Okay, so that's using factoring. Now we can also solve this using quadratic methods, using the quadratic formula. So the quadratic formula just has to be tweaked a little bit. So instead of x equals, we need to do x squared. So now we're going to resolve this problem here. So our quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. But because this would work if the equation was quadratic and it's 4, that's why we're going to have to put a 2 here. Now another way to think about it is if I make this a quadratic instead. So minus 5y plus 1 equals 0. Okay? I again need to square this to make it 4y to the 4th, and I need to square this, and therefore I'm going to square this. That's one way to kind of think about it. But the other way to think about it is that you're letting, and again it's not x, it's going to be y in this problem since there's y's and not x, so it's going to get us a y squared. But another way to think about it is that you're letting y squared be y. I know that's really weird to think about, but you're replacing the y squared with y, so this would be a y, and then this would be y squared squared. So you're kind of making a substitution there. So that's why we're just going to square our final answer. So we're going to use the quadratic formula, but we just have to square it there. So we'd have negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So then the opposite of negative 5, that's positive 5. And then negative 5 squared is 25. And negative 4 times 1 is negative 16. And then 25 minus 16 is 9. And then the square root of 9 is 3. And remember, this is not x, it's going to be y because that's the variable being used. And then 5 plus 3 divided by 8. And then we're going to do 5 minus 3 divided by 8. So then we'd have y squared equals 1. And then we'd have y squared equals 1/4. Okay, so remember our answers we got. We got 1, negative 1, 1/2, and negative 1/2. If we stop there, clearly that is not 4 answers there. So that's why we're going to square root both sides. That would make the square go away. And we get plus or minus the square root of 1 is 1. So that's 2 answers. And then if we square root 1/4, the square root of 1 is 1. And the square root of 4 is 2. And when we put the square root symbol in, we need plus or minus. And then we get 4 answers. So we get the same answers we got here using the quadratic formula, just making a substitution because we need it squared to make it the 4th.